Hello. I really appreciate you being here. We're going to wait a few minutes. But anybody else who wants to join, come in. This is the first of a few of these that I'm going to be doing. Just feeling it out, seeing how this feels. But I think I'm going to make this a weekly thing, depending on who responds well to that. If you have a comment, if you have any thoughts about this, any thoughts to share, any feedback, any stories you think I should be pursuing, I'd love to hear about it. You can put it all in the chat right there. All right, I'm just going to chat for a while. I only have about a half hour, and so I wanted to just say hello and share a little bit about what I'm working on, what I'm thinking about. First of all, I just want to thank anybody who is on here to just for the support that you've shown. I really, really appreciate it. It is a noble group of people that takes a risk, a financial risk on a journalist. Risk is not even the word, right? Because you're not making any money back. Let me tell you. But you are supporting a thing that I am trying very hard to accomplish here, which is a independent version of what I've been doing my whole career. It's very hard to do. The economics of it make very little sense, and so the padding that you are offering me in the hard fall into independent journalism is enormous. And so I really, really appreciate it. So I'm thinking a little bit about, if you are someone who follows me regularly, then you know that I've kind of turned up the cadence this last week. I'm realizing that this is a game of volume, and the kind of, the magazine world that I came from was one that taught you to think by sort of in weekly installments, and that doesn't work. This is a daily game, and so I'm learning that I got to start banging out a daily piece of content, and I am definitely learning that cadence, not because I haven't worked it before. In news, you work that cadence, but everyone around you is making that happen, and in this case, this is me having to do that myself, and so that's been a learning process, I would say. So what am I thinking about right now? Just to round up the week's news events, we saw, of course, a huge amount of sort of teetering when it comes to the AI bubble, right? The bubble that analysts are all saying is here. And as my friend Robert Armstrong, who's a commentator at the Financial Times, put it, he basically says, the headlines shouldn't be, is the bubble over? The headline should be, the bubble continues, but for how much longer, basically. And that's sort of what we saw. So yesterday we had NVIDIA's earnings. What was that? No, Wednesday we had NVIDIA's earnings. NVIDIA, as you know, makes all the chips that makes the AI world run, and they absolutely crushed their earnings. they made like $500 billion or something in revenue. I mean, just unbelievable amounts of money, and more than $50 billion in profit for Q3. Crazy numbers, and beat analysts' expectations, which is pretty crazy because analysts have been expecting this thing to basically hold up the American economy. So kind of amazing that they made this happen. And to hear the CEO talk, he basically was like, Jensen Huang was like, bubble, what bubble? He just doesn't believe that thing, or he at least doesn't want to say publicly that he's in any way part of anything speculative here. But we saw that company go from being worth $4.5 trillion the day of its earnings call to $5 trillion the next day. Well, now we've seen the markets start to fall again, start to tumble a little bit, because when you speak to the CEOs, when you listen to the CEOs of these companies and you ask them practical questions like, how are you going to make the money back? Their answer, like Sam Altman gave to a guy named Brad Gerstner on a podcast recently, is, well, Brad, if you don't want this stock, I'll find someone else who wants to buy it. Or if they're asked questions like, you say you're going to need this many, you're going to spend trillions of dollars on, more than $1 trillion on data centers. Where are you going to put them all? What's your plan? And literally on stage, this Sam Altman said, well, we might put them in space. This is the kind of, talk about speculative, right? This is the world in which they either can't answer a basic financial question or answer it with science fiction screenplay, screenwriting. So one of the things that a lot of people smarter than me in the investment world are thinking about and talking about is the huge circularity of the financial arrangements that you're seeing here, right? NVIDIA has put like $100 billion worth of investment into OpenAI, which is their customer. So that's weird. That's a taking in each other's washing kind of idea. They put $10 billion into Anthropic. They've formed weird kind of in-kind or financial arrangements with Amazon, with Google. These guys are all each other's vendors and customers and now investors in this very circular way that, I think it really needs to be thought of as, equal parts feathers and concrete. This is not how you build a building, in theory. And it smacks of the kinds of innovative but ultimately disastrous repackaging of financial arrangements that we saw, in the mortgage-backed securities world, right? Also, as lots of people smarter than me have pointed out, all of this capital expenditure is not like software where you can just update remotely, right? These are physical assets that depreciate over time. And in doing so, they become a liability eventually for these companies. And so if you're going to put $1 trillion into servers and data centers and all of this stuff, eventually you got to start dealing with the depreciation of that on your balance sheets. And so all of that is really complex, I would say. I would also say here that the other thing I've been really paying attention to this week is the incredible the clear and obvious connective tissue between the heads of tech companies and what Trump has been pushing in terms of doing away with state law when it comes to AI. So these companies have always argued that they want federal regulation, not necessarily because they want to be regulated, but because they just don't want to have to deal with state regulations. They want to be in a position where they are only having to deal with one set of rules. And one can understand that, On the other hand, as many people have pointed out, the whole notion of a big company writing federal rules is that they get to capture the regulatory regime and basically write rules that serves their interests, makes it impossible for smaller players to get in. Anyway, all of that is just to say that there are no federal regulations right now. There are zero federal regulations. I mean, we're what, 20 plus years into the social media era. We still don't have a data privacy law in this country, right? Only kids are protected in any way when it comes to their online lives. We have no protections. And that's why state law has stepped in. This is why you've got state lawmakers like Scott Wiener, the author of SB 53 here in California, trying to put in a provision that says we get to look into your safety and security protocols to see whether or not you have them, first of all, and what they are, those kinds of rules, which you would imagine to be, something that you could imagine an FCC or an FTC uh, getting involved in. There's nothing like that at the federal level. And yet, President Trump is expected today, and I've been watching the headlines, but I haven't seen it yet, expected to give a executive order, created executive order that would basically ban state law and when it comes to AI. We saw Ted Cruz try to push this idea back in the summer. He tried to attach this addendum to the Beautiful Big Bill, Big Beautiful Bill Act that would have put in a 10-year moratorium on AI law at the state level, but that got creamed, crushed, 99-1 in the Senate. And as a result, and politically, it's an incredibly unpopular position. There's a Gallup poll that I have in the most recent newsletter from September 2025 that asked people, do you think that AI regulation should be necessary, and do you care whether it slows the development of the technology? Well, 80% of respondents were in favor of regulation, even if it slows down the development of the technology. So all the hand-wringing from the people at the top of these companies saying, we have to catch up with China, we have to have the handcuffs taken off us, we have to be able to move. They're the only ones who care about that. On a political level, people don't trust those companies. They want some kind of regulation in place. And this is incredibly bipartisan. 88% of Democrats and 79% of Republicans feel this way, according to this Gallup poll. In every major group, every adult, basically, group that Gallup looks at is wildly in favor of regulation. So the whole idea that you are somehow that President Trump believes this is not going to win him points with anybody except for these companies, and that's of course what leads you to the through line of the AI czar David Sacks that Trump has put into place. Former PayPal mafia guy. He sold Yammer to Microsoft for $1 billion way back when, and he's had a venture capital firm. He has become the liaison as the special secretary or whatever his title is around AI and crypto. He is, of course, the guy you call if you want to sort of get in there. And so we've seen, once upon a time, Steve Bannon described the tech CEOs arriving in Trump's orbit as being as him putting heads on the wall, basically. Well, now they've started to sort of figure out how to get what they want, and through adulation or money, they are these tech CEOs are getting what they want. Jensen Huang spent like an hour of a public presentation going on and on and on and on about how brave and amazing President Trump is. Amazon, Google, Meta, all the big players have put money into renovating the big ballroom. And then, most embarrassing of all, I mean, we already saw Tim Cook give a golden statue to Trump, and because that's his language, that's what the president loves to see. Well, all these guys turned up for the big reception for Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman this week, right? I mean, these guys literally showing up and toasting the Saudi Crown Prince, a guy who, I understand, these people want the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi to throw itself at their industry. And he is talking about spending $600 billion with the United States on this stuff. But man, couldn't you just sit there and not raise your glass? You don't have to, it's not your job to raise your glass to the Saudi Crown Prince. You could just sit there, it seems to me. And I would argue you could maybe not even attend, but whatever. Anyway, all of that seems to connect in some way, I feel, to this executive order, which says we're not, you can't, it directs the attorney general to go after states that have onerous AI laws, quote unquote, onerous AI laws. It talks about woke AI, which is not a thing, according to the people that I speak to, the technical people who actually build these systems. It is a very, very politically motivated thing. And it goes, of course, with the Trump administration's pattern of being very inconsistent when it comes to their application of state states' rights. They are not ideological about states' rights. They don't believe one or the other. They seem to believe that it's just a tool, a political tool. So when it comes to something like education or energy, they're happy to give states their rights. But when it comes to something like regulating technology in this way, they want to take those rights away. So the next thing that I'm going to start thinking about from here is a pair of topics that I've been focused on the last few weeks, and I think are going to probably be the focus of my year. And so the first one, so it's a pair of topics. One is what's called, what people are beginning to refer to as AI psychosis. It's a thing that I've, it's not an official DSM-5 kind of, it's not a diagnostic code yet, but it is emerging, not just in anecdotes, but in the statistics kept by these companies, that there is a certain category of person who, according to these statistics, falls into a certain subset of really troubling behaviors when it comes to their interactions with LLMs. This ranges from mania and psychosis. According to OpenAI, they put out several weeks ago numbers that suggested that 0.07% of their weekly users are exhibiting signs of mania and psychosis in their interactions with this stuff. 0.15% of users are developing an excessive emotional attachment to these LLMs, and 0.15% of users are openly discussing their plans for suicide, asking for advice, really signaling an intent to try and take their own lives. Now, there's some problems with these statistics. First of all, they're internal statistics, right? We don't have an independent body that's looking at this stuff because, again, we have no federal law around this stuff, and state laws haven't yet gotten there. We also don't have numbers over time from this study. The numbers that we've been given by OpenAI don't show which direction these numbers are going. It was just released as part of an announcement that they have a panel of 170 mental health professionals helping them to improve their ChatGPT's response to this kind of behavior. They say they've made a 65% improvement in how well the chatbot directs you to human services when you signal an intent to commit suicide, that kind of thing. Now, that's the extreme case, right? And I did a presentation a few days ago to a group, and a man came up to me afterwards and said, well, the numbers you're showing us are incredibly tiny. These 0.15% numbers, very, very small. And I explained to him that those are weekly numbers. They're not annual numbers. If you look at the prevalence of an attempt to commit suicide in the annual numbers in the United States, it's 0.6% of people actively try and take their own lives. That's an annual number. Also, the weekly number that OpenAI is offering there, that's 0.15% of 800 million weekly users. That's about 1.2 million people. That's a lot of people. Now, you could say, as the owners of these platforms have always said, well, we are just a reflection of society, and so what shows up on our platform is just a function of what shows up in the rest of society. We can't be held responsible for that. But at the same time, you also have this company openly talking about trying to create this product not just as a productivity tool, but according to the latest video they put out that talks about their mission, it's a emotional companion. They want it to be an emotional companion. There was this big hubbub when they changed the tenor of the interactions between ChatGPT 4 and GPT-5, and people were deeply disappointed by that because it was less personality driven, it was less smooth, it was more robotic. And I would say from a public health perspective, that's probably good. But from the perspective of users, they didn't like that. And so Sam Altman announced, okay, well, never mind. We're going to go ahead and go back to the thing where you can make it whatever kind of personality you want. He also announced the intention to let people have erotic conversations with this stuff, let adults be adults, that kind of thing. So I would say it's one thing to say, we are just a reflection of society. It's another thing to say, we know this thing exists in society, and we make a technology that wildly, that interacts very powerfully with that stuff. Okay. Now, I put all of that into one bucket. AI psychosis as that's the extreme example. But the thesis that I'm pursuing here is that there is, in fact, a much wider spectrum of AI psychosis into which all of us fall, myself included, right? Everybody, I think, who is interacting with these systems, and this is the thesis of my book, The Loop, everybody who's interacting with these systems is interacting on some level with their own circuitry that we just barely understand, and that controls most of our decisions throughout our day in a very powerful, very predictable, and very unconscious way. So my thesis is there is a broad spectrum when it comes to something like AI psychosis. At the far end is stuff like mania, psychosis, suicidal intent, that kind of thing. But at the near side is stuff like coming home after a date. There's a thing that kids are doing now. Coming home after a date. Kids, what am I? I'm old, kids in their early 20s, coming home and bouncing the facts of the date off a chatbot, saying, here's what he said, here are the jokes we made, what do you think? Is this going to work out? Late night confidant, right, is kind of the thing there. And, pretty benign. On the far end of that is people who say, this is my guru, this is my soulmate, this is my friend, right? They have truly anthropomorphized this thing into a very, very powerful part of their lives. On one side is things like creative co-fiction. There's an amazing guy, Deepak Arora, I think is his name, who makes these incredible South Asian science fiction concepts using Midjourney. These amazing shots of someone in futuristic Bombay who's half cyborg. I mean, just cool stuff, right? And I think there's amazing stuff that comes out of the capacity of very creative people to generate some ideas out of this stuff. At the far end of that is people who come to believe that this stuff is actually happening. And you have, at this point, there's more than 200 documented cases of people writing into the Federal Trade Commission to complain that they've had a big psychotic, effect, event with this stuff. They've come to believe. One woman writes in and says that she came to believe that she was part of a divine war she couldn't escape. Another guy wrote in to say that he thought his soul had received a software update. These are really serious things. And in many cases, these are people who say they have no prior incidents of this kind of thing. So the spectrum of AI psychosis, I think, is a thing that we got to come to grips with. I think it's something that we're going to have to, I'm going to be trying to document over the coming year. I have an application into a fellowship that I'm hoping might support that work. The support that you guys offer makes this possible. And again, thank you so, so much for the support that you offer. So AI psychosis, and it may not be the right term, because I've had a couple of people sort of give me the reaction that it makes it sound very extreme and like something that afflicts other people. And it is true that what I want to sort of come up with is some sort of terminology that lets people see themselves in it, because I see myself in it. I know that my over-reliance on this stuff sometimes, when I'm a little rushed or a little lazy and I need to make a decision, get some research done, get something out the door, I'm as prone to this stuff as anybody. So anyway, AI psychosis, that's one of the umbrellas I'm going to be looking at. Another one is the concept of that I'm developing with a friend and former colleague, someone that I did a fellowship with at Stanford, named Dr. Jennifer Freyd, Freyd. She is an amazing human being. And she is, psychological. Thank you for this, Brett. Sorry, I'm getting good commentary here. Thank you, Brett. Perhaps psychological effects of interaction with AI. Yes, I'm with you. My media brain can't help but say, I'm just thinking of the kind of TV people that I used to deal with. They'd be like, that's a little wordy. I would always come in and be like, what about this and this and this? I remember once I pitched to the Today Show a story, and I was like, we should do the story on California's new privacy regulations. They're as strict, they make California as strict as Europe. And the executive producer of the Today Show burst out laughing and said, that's the worst pitch I've ever heard. He's like, you told me, you put the words California, regulation, and Europe into your opening sentence. We'll never put that on TV. He was a very nice guy, but that was his point. So I'm with you. And if you have thoughts about how to smash that down into something that people recognize, I would really love it. Anyway, so AI psychosis, one thing, whatever we're going to wind up calling that. Then the other one with Jennifer Freyd is So Dr. Jennifer Fried is a psychologist who specializes in memory, and she has come up with this incredible framework for what she calls institutional courage and institutional trauma. So, institutional courage and institutional betrayal. My bad. So, institutional betrayal is the places in which she combines the theory of attachment, that people grow attached to, for instance, a workplace. And I know this feeling, right? You're attached to a workplace, it's part of your identity. And then suddenly that workplace betrays you. Either you are like laid off, or let's say you are sexually harassed and you try to report that harasser. And suddenly these people that you see every day are making terrible decisions, and in some cases adversarial decisions with you about the response. They're either like putting you in the room with your harasser to work it out, or they're icing you out so that they can avoid legal liability. And you are suddenly betrayed by the institution in this really fundamental way. So she has documented the ways in which betrayal on both a sort of personal and institutional level, there's a certain choreography to it. And part of that choreography that she's identified, I mean, she's literally done the quantitative research to show this, is a term that she's coined called DARVO, which you may have heard of. So DARVO, it's her best known thing, and it's a brilliant thing that she gets no credit for. You see it all over TikTok. People are always talking about DARVO, but they don't give her credit. So DARVO stands for, it is a descriptor of the ways in which public figures tend to dodge responsibility when they're accused of something. And it stands for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. She began the research around this when Clarence Thomas first came out, and he talked about, he called the accusation from Anita Hill, a high-tech lynching and all of this stuff, right? He denied it. He attacked. He called himself he attacked her credibility and called himself the victim, right? All the way through to Brett Kavanaugh, who, in his confirmation hearings was talking about, how dare you drag my family's name through the mud, blah, 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 blah. So she's shown that this is really a repeating pattern. And it's such an established pattern that one of the areas of life that has really, like one industry that has really grabbed onto the DARVO concept, much to her horror, is defense attorneys. Defense attorneys use DARVO, the DARVO defense now. It's called the DARVO defense. When Johnny Depp and, what's her name? I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but right, that when those two were fighting in court, they were using the DARVO tactic against one another. We talked to one of the attorneys involved, and that's what he called it. It's just so if you're an academic trying to identify the habits of wrongdoers, and then suddenly lawyers start using your stuff to get their clients off, it's a nightmare. Anyway, Jennifer Fried and I have become friends, and what we're talking about now is how do we apply some of the thinking that she has come up with around institutional betrayal and DARVO and the rest of it. She runs a thing called the Center for Institutional Courage. How do we apply that to AI and think about AI, what I think we're going to call AI betrayal? And this is both the individual and the institutional response to this stuff. This is everything from the word betrayal actually comes up a lot in the anecdotal reports from people about a chatbot. They're developing a really strong attachment to the chatbot, and then it like changes its tune or it suggests something weird to them or whatever. And they call that betrayal because it's a system designed to elicit attachment, which from a business perspective is exactly what you want. You want it attached, right? Google had this thing. I talked to a guy at Google, and he was describing how if you're going to green light a product at Google, it has to meet the toothbrush standard, the toothbrush rule, they call it. And it means it's got to be something that's habitual and 3 times a day you're going to use it. The chatbots, I think, have wildly outstripped that, have gone way beyond that, right? People are calling it their friend, their lover, their guru, whatever. This is a great business thing. But that attachment level creates incredible capacity for betrayal. And it also, I think, is going to very powerfully create the capacity for betrayal at the institutional level, right? Because we're already seeing people, even in cases where people are not getting canned because the AI can in theory do the job. And I think we're going to see enormous betrayal around that. I talked to a researcher at the Brookings Institute who was pointing out that the best jobs you can get as a non-college educated woman, ones that really let you, have a career and retire, are things like clerical work, bookkeeping, admin, being a receptionist, and those things are going to go away with AI, right? That's a form of institutional betrayal. That's betrayal right there. Another one is just when you are suddenly called upon to do vastly more work, right? If you've followed me for a while, you've heard me say many, many times, because I can't stop bringing it up, that beginning of last year, Sam Altman was on a podcast and said that he and his tech CEO friends have a bet going as to when we're going to see the first $1 billion one-person company. Well, on the one hand, you go, okay, like I can see why you would think that'd be cool. On the other hand, not only would that be economically disastrous, I think. I mean, at least we don't have the economic scholarship to know if you can run a country that way. But also think about the life of that person. The $1 billion one-person company, that person's not sleeping a lot, right? Like the pressure that productivity puts on people is enormous. I mean, the illusion that we've been sold here is that somehow this is going to lead to us like relaxing in our gardens. I don't think, there's not a lot of history of that. There's something called the Jevons paradox that I keep coming back to, which is this concept that the more you use something efficiently, in fact, the more of it you tend to consume. William Jevons posited this around the use of coal in 19th century England. Well, I think that's going to be true of human time. As we use it more efficiently, I think we're going to demand more of it. There's a chart I always go back to that shows the responsibilities of your average retail clerk as compared to their adjusted wages over time. And over the last 40 years, the wages have stayed the same. The job responsibilities have gone up and up and up and up and up. And that's why, if you like me, if you travel to small towns like I used to all the time for NBC, you go and stay at one of these hotels. There's one person working. There's the person at the desk, and they're the only person on site all night, right? That's that thing. And I feel like AI is going to make that true, in industry after industry. The expectation will be, we don't need backup. You don't need more than one person to do this thing. And so that is another sort of form of betrayal I think we could characterize here. So what do we do with this exactly? I'm not totally sure. I think I'm trying to get out of the habit of just as a friend of mine put it, like luxuriating in the problem. I don't want to just luxuriate in the problem. I want to talk about solutions. I want to try and make those solutions happen. But one thing that is true in my life over and over again is, because we're thinking here about big systemic problems, I think we're going to need big systemic solutions. The thing that in television and in a lot of discourse you hear from people is they ask, well, what can we as individuals do to fight back? What can we at home do? And I think that's kind of an illusion, or at least, I think the options are limited. And because we're talking here about something that is psychological, that is powerfully psychological, I think it's sort of beyond our ability to make decisions for ourselves that are going to make this happen. Like, sure, you can, turn off the color on your phone, right? And you can ask the chatbot to be less friendly. And, there's ways you can do it. But I think fundamentally, we're going to need to respond to this in a systemic way. It reminds me of, I'm a former drinker. I don't drink anymore. And when I see liquor ads that say, drink responsibly, it just makes me crazy, because there's no such thing for me, right? There's no such thing for me. And so, and yet, if we're going to live in a world in which you have to use the tools to keep your job, that's like me being forced to drink responsibly. There's no such thing, So I think the responses here are going to be systemic. And one of the big things, and this is, I think, why I want to work on both categorizing and describing AI psychosis and AI betrayal, is I want there to be a body of study around this that we can draw on when it comes time to sue. I know it's not noble, but I think that's going to be what has to happen, because the reason that we have, I think, established some of the guardrails that are really fundamental to keeping people healthy and safe in the United States have always had to do with that, have always come through the courts. Seatbelts, football helmets, cigarettes, right? We have figured this stuff out by suing. And so I think because we're talking here not about death, not about financial loss, which are the two categories of American life that I think we regulate the best, we're talking here about behavior. We're talking here about agency and choices and attachment. We're talking about psychological effects and defending those effects, and defending against those effects, protecting people against those effects, I think is going to be a really important and powerful industry. I think that's going to be a thing. It's going to be the legal industry, a legal, I don't even know, Tom Terbell, you're on here. What do we call this? Is it the legal, body of work, legal activism, whatever we call this. Anyway, that category of work, I think, is going to need concepts like Duke Law professor Nita Farahani has this concept. She's been on the podcast, and I'm trying to get her again. She's got a great and amazing Substack that is walking you through each week of her AI law course at Duke Law. Very, very interesting. And she's great because she takes my kind of namby-pamby, content of our brain kind of thinking, and she tries to really make it into a question of legal liability. She has this book called The Battle for Your Brain, and in it she talks about the notion of cognitive liberty. Are people free to make decisions without interference? And that is, I think, it's a concept that she has elucidated, in such a way that I think you really could win an argument in court over that. And if you've read my book, The Loop, there's a lot of instances where I'm showing like, oh, here's where you can actually take what people in the old days would say, well, that's just people making bad choices, and show, oh no, these are people who were on guardrail, aren't on like a guidance track, were being guided along by a very sophisticated kind of corral system, whether it is the targeting of people who might be, prone to gambling, by the companies that make these casino simulators, or whether it's, people being ensnared in addictive behavior around porn, or, you can show that inside the companies that make money off that stuff, there are systems for finding and exploiting people's habits, not just in the old school kind of like marketing way, but in the way in which they're really plugging into how people make choices. And I think AI is going to make that possible in this really powerful and new way. And so it feels to me like that's a really important, if I could help people find that kind of, find understand the tactics of that industry such that some legal hay could be made out of that, I'd be very, very, I could die happy. I don't know about happy, but I could die feeling like I'd pulled something off. So I've gone on here for about 40 minutes. I have to jump off. I really, really appreciate you being here. I'm going to try and do this every week. Again, I said this at the beginning, but for anyone who missed it, being real supporters, like financial supporters of this platform, is an enormous gift. And it is, I recognize, a gift. What you are giving me is the ability to think this stuff through without the constant panic of financial ruin at my back. And that is a real gift. I think one of the great difficulties of this independent journalism moment that we're all theoretically in right now is that people don't have the cushion they need to do the work that is actually going to make a difference in the world. When everyone is scrambling for that fastest take, and the most clicks they can possibly get, I really think that's the point at which democracy starts to come apart, because nobody can take the time to really dig into something. You need the institutional support in order to dig into something big. In this case, like AI psychosis, AI betrayal. And so I really appreciate your time and your support and the rest of this. It's super helpful. Brett, I like these other ideas you're throwing at me here. Disordered AI interaction. AI disorder. That's interesting. Yeah. Distortion. AI distortion. Yeah, I like this. I'm going to play around with this too. So thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to do this next week as well. Or is that true? Friday after Thanksgiving? Am I going to do that? Maybe. Could be next week. Could be 2 weeks. I'll let you know. And I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate your support. And thanks for being part of the Rip Current. Take care, you guys.